بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد قال الله عز وجل في كتاب العزيز بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين لا شريك له وبذلك أمرت وأنا أول المسلمين. وعن أنس بن مالك رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا أراد الله بعبد خيرا يستعمله قيل كيف يستعمله يا رسول الله؟ قال يوفقه لعمل صالح قبل الموت رواه الترمذي أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Brothers and sisters in Islam, in this world, people from different professions, they take honor and pride in different achievements and accomplishments. Those of us who watch football, many years after a player has retired, when he gets the knock on his door, and it's the Hall of Fame knock, you're in the Hall of Fame, those videos can make a grown man cry. The person starts crying so much, I made it to the Hall of Fame, and all he's getting is this jacket and this name, he's a Hall of Famer. And all these different things that give a person happiness and joy and honor that I've accomplished this, I have achieved this. For a believer, the greatest accomplishment and the greatest mark of honor is manifested and conveyed to us in the message of this great scholar, Qadi Iyad, rahmatullah alayhi, and he says in a poem, وَمِمَّا زَادَنِي شَرَفًا وَتِيهًا وَكِدْتُ بِخَمْسِ أَطَأُ الثُّرَيَّا دخلتني في قولك يا عبادي وصرت محمدا لي نبيا. He says that thing that gives me the greatest happiness and greatest sense of joy is the fact, and such joy that I could start flying and reach the stars, is the fact, O Allah, that you have called me Ya Abdi, O my servant, Ya Ibadi, O my servants. When the angels, they come to Allah at the time of Asr or at the time of Fajr, Hadith in Bukhari, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks them, where are you coming from? And how did you, كَيْفَ تَرَقْتُمْ عِبَادِي? How did you leave my servants? How did you leave my slaves? The fact, number one thing that gives me happiness and joy is that, oh Allah, you think that I'm deserving of being called your slave. Ya ibadi. And that you have made the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as my prophet. These two things give me the greatest sense of joy and happiness. And then the poet says, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, man kana fi sakhatihi muhsinan, فكيف يكون إذا رضي. If Allah, when you make Him angry, is so gracious to you, is so benevolent and so generous with you, then how would Allah be when you serve Him? How would Allah be? Right now, all of us know how many sins we have committed in our lives. Despite that, Allah is honoring us and gifting us the ability to sit in this gathering and have our sins forgiven. Allah gave us so many things despite the fact that we keep doing things that disobey Him. Man kana fi sakhatihi muhsina. That's why I'm saying the greatest honor is that we are the servants and slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The one who is so generous when someone disobeys Him, how will He be when someone obeys Him? It comes in Hadith al-Qudsi that you've seen me, كَيْفَ أُعَامِلُ بِالْمُعْرِضِينَ عَنِّي فَكَيْفَ أُعَامِلُ بِالْمُقْبِلِينَ عَلَيَّ. He says, you have seen how I treat those who turn away from me with generosity, with forgiveness. Then just imagine for 1 second how my treatment will be for those who come towards me. So our greatest honor is the fact that we are Abd of Allah. And today the topic that was given to me was the worship of the Prophet ﷺ. This was his greatest honor, mark of accomplishment for us is that we are Abd of Allah. How do I know if I am His Abd? Number one, غاية الحب مع غاية الطاعة مع غاية الإخلاص. These three things if it's in a person, then they are indeed deserving of the title of being the servants of Allah. And all three things were found in the worship of the Prophet ﷺ. Number one, complete love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Complete love. That is why the Salaf, when they would pray tahajjud all night they would pray tahajjud. Malik bin Dinar is praying all night in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, worshipping Him. At Fajr time he says, Ya Rabbi, ma abadtuka haqqa ibadatik. Oh Allah, I did not worship you the way you deserve to be worshipped. Rafi' rahmatullahi, he says, after worshipping Allah all night, he says, ليس هذه عبادتي من يطلب ليس هذه عبادة من يطلب الجنة فارحمني بالخلوص من النار برحمتك. He says, oh Allah, even though he worshipped Allah all night out of love for Him, he says, this is not the worship of the one who wants Jannah, but oh Allah, through your mercy, grant me freedom from Jahannam. Even though he worshipped Allah all night, he's saying, oh Allah, this is not the way a person who desires of Jannah should be worshiping you. Just out of your mercy, grant me freedom from Jahannam. So number one, it is love. Out of love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a person can now struggle and strive in His sake, for His sake and for His ibadah. Al-qalb al-muhib, a person who has love for Allah, yuhibbu nasab ilayhi, loves to strive and struggle for Him. Loves it. No problem. The more struggle he goes through, the more the person loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is why the Prophet would struggle and strive so much for Allah at night that his feet would get swollen. Because it was out of love for Him that you forget the pain. Ansani hubbuhu waj'uhu. That the love for Him has made me forget the pain that I'm facing and that I'm experiencing while I'm worshiping Him. When Bilal radiallahu anhu was asked, how did you cope with the difficulty and pain when you were dragged in the streets of Mecca? He says, مزجت حلاوة الإيمان بمرارة العذاب فتغط حلاوة الإيمان بمرارة العذاب فصبرت. He says these two emotions were mixed. One was the pain that I was suffering, and the other was the sweetness of worshiping Him. When these two things were mixed internally, the joy and the sweetness of worshiping Him outweighed and overpowered the pain that I was suffering, so it was easy to be patient. So a person who has love, it's easy to struggle and strive for Allah. That is why the Sahaba who saw the worship of the Prophet ﷺ, what does Allama Iqbal he say about them? He says, "Di adhan hai kabhi Europe ke kalisaon mein, kabhi Afriqa ke tapte hue sahraon mein, शान आंखों में न जचती थी जहां दारों की, कलमा पढ़ते थे हम छाँव में तलवारों की, थी न कुछ तेगजनी अपनी हुकूमत के लिए, सर बकफ फिरते थे क्या हम दौलत के लिए." Iqbal, he's saying about Sahaba, these were people during their struggle. What struggle? Not struggle for dunya, not struggle at the loss of loved ones. Their struggle as they leave their homes and they're in the path of Allah, far away from their homes, in the middle of the desert or in the middle of Europe where they know nobody. Allama Iqbal, he says, these were people that even in that moment, in that struggle, they stopped and they said, Allahu Akbar, remembering Allah. He says, Shan aankhon mein najashti thi jahan daron ki, kalma padhte the hum chhaon mein talwaron ki. They found so much happiness lowering their head in front of Allah beneath the shade of swords. They lowered their head in front of Allah beneath the shade of swords. Allah elevated their heads till the day of judgment. Allah honored them because they lowered their heads in front of Allah during hard times, during difficult times. It was out of love for Allah that they were able to do this. The next thing that makes us deserving of the title of Abd is exactly how much time am I giving Him? Of all the things we heard in the last 24 hours, at the end of the day, before the Prophet ﷺ set foot on the battle of Badr, he cried all night. It was through those tears that Allah decided there will be victory. The day before Badr, the Prophet ﷺ was asking, should we do this, should we not do this? And he was reassured that we should do this. The night of Badr, he was crying in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the day of Badr, he was telling people, this is going to be the gravesite of that person. With so much confidence. It's like a basketball player who practices the same move over and over and over again. It doesn't matter if there's 3 seconds left on the shot clock. When Michael Jordan was asked, how did you shoot that shot? The shot. He said, I practiced this millions of times. It was as if I was still practicing it. The moment was not big enough. It did not make them wait. This is how the Prophet ﷺ, the whole night, worshiping Allah, showing Allah that, oh Allah, I'm your abd. I'm your servant. Allahumma aghnini bil iftiqari ilayk. Oh Allah, be enough for me because I'm completely dependent on you. I have nothing else. And I have nobody else but you. And so as he's showing this to Allah, then Allah inspires him. And Allah gives him this confidence that now, the next morning when he wakes up, he's saying, this is the gravesite of that person. And this is the gravesite of that person before the battle even begins. So the second thing is of abd, what makes us deserving of abd is how much time have I allocated for this from the two resources Allah has given me. One, my time, and my second is my wealth. The Prophet ﷺ's worship was his entire life. His entire night was serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if not his entire night, majority of his night. And his entire day was in service to mankind. His service to mankind was a proof of how much he loved mankind. And his worship of Allah at night was a proof of how much he loved Allah at night. And both of these combined makes ibadah. There's two branches of ibadah. Worship of Allah and service to mankind. At night, the Prophet ﷺ would worship Allah all night until his feet would get swollen. But he was the best one to walk on the face of the earth. But when he would get up for Fajr Salah, if he would hear a child cry, he would make it short. Because to him, this was out of mercy for the people who were behind him. So how much time have I taken out from my day to be called Abd of Allah? To be even categorized as this? The Prophet gave his entire life and entire wealth. For us, today before we leave, I have 7 minutes left, we should all decide that 10% of my wealth, bare minimum baseline, is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And 10% of my day, if we want to be the abd of Allah, and that's the honor of a believer, and 10% of my time is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you have 24 hours, what's 10%? 2.5 hours almost, 2.5 hours. And we're going to split this in 3 portions. The first, and this is all the prophetic worship. The first portion of it is in our ibadah. And ibadah consists of 4 things. Number 1, nawafil. Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullah, he says, the Prophet ﷺ during the day would pray 40 rakats of nawafil in sunnah, 40. When the Prophet was told, I love you, O Prophet of Allah. I love you, O Prophet of Allah. What did he say? A'inni alayya bi kathrat as-sujud. Do sajda more. Words and statements are good, but do more sajda. Show Allah that you're his abd. Show Allah. So at the end of this conference, these are some decisions we have to make. We have to make these decisions. Otherwise, the one who is not Allah's slave, then he is the slave to other things in this world. And we get no happiness from serving anybody else in this world. So we split this 2.5 hours. The first third is in ibadah. In ibadah, there are 4 things. Nawafil. Number 2, dhikr. Remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet some Sahaba say we would sit in one gathering and we would hear the Prophet repeating astaghfirullah more than 100 times. How about us? And it has to be calculated. It has to be sectioned off. And I'll tell you about that in 1 second. The second thing is dhikr. The third is dua. Daily. 2.5 hours, 1/3 of our time is being spent over here. And the fourth is tilawah of Quran. That's 1/3. The second third is spent in learning about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Learning about our deen. We have whatever resources you have, whichever communities you're from, use them. If there's a book that a scholar has recommended, read it. If there's a scholar in your community, spend time with them. And if you have none of the above, then yes, it's okay to watch a lecture online, but watch it actively and not passively. Take a notebook, a paper, sit down with adab and learn about something. Even if you do that, it's sufficient. And the third, this is the Prophet's worship. The third was service to mankind, serving people, benefiting others. No, serving your wife doesn't count. Nor does serving your parents count. You know why? That's fard. You have to do that. This is extra. How do I serve, Sheikh? What do I do? You don't need to be given a position in the masjid to serve the masjid. You can walk in and vacuum the masjid. You can fix the shoes at the shoe shelf. You can pick up something from outside the masjid, whatever it takes. One of these scholars, he says, مَنْ لَا وِرْدَ لَهُ لَا وَارِدَ لَهُ. A person who does not have a routine of time and money allocated for Allah, then Allah will not inspire this person's heart with good things. لَا وَارِدَ لَهُ. This person's heart will be locked. The love of Allah will not enter the heart of this person. The love of the Prophet will not enter this person. مَنْ لَا وِرْدَ لَهُ لَا وَارِدَ لَهُ. Take out time and allocate these things. And how do we take out time? There's a person who goes to the restaurant. And all of you from out of state, most of the restaurants in Dearborn are shady. All right? So a person who goes to a restaurant and he or she sits there and they order food. There's two ways of taking food back for someone you love. Say it's your mother or your father or your wife. One is you order food and whatever is left over, you put it together and you bring it back to your wife or your mother and say, I love you, I brought some food back for you. MashaAllah, you thought of me. But there's another way of doing it. Once you sit down on the table, at that moment when you're ordering food for yourself, you also order food to take away. You have it sectioned away already and say, this is to carry out. And then you bring that for your loved one. Which one is better? The second one. So you section your time and your wealth out ahead of time. The Salaf used to do this. One of the Salaf, Qurra bin Murra, rahmatullah alayh, he was sitting down and he was crying so much. Someone came to him and he said, what happened? أَجَاءَ نَعْيُ أَهْلِكَ. Did someone come to you telling you and informing you of a loved one that has passed away? He says, بَلْ هُ أَشَدُّ مِنْ ذَلِكَ. It's something far greater than that. Far more alarming than that. He says, أَوَجْعٌ يُؤْلِمُكَ. Is it some pain that you're suffering? Some difficulty that you're going through? He said, something worse than that. He said, what is it, Sheikh? He says, it was my time at night when nobody was around me. The door was locked. Babi mughlaq wa sitri mublis. The door was locked and the curtain was down. And it was my time to recite a few pages of the Quran, and I forgot to do it. I missed out. That's bothering me, and that's making me cry. This is a sign of an abd of Allah, that when they allocate, and when they miss, it bothers them. It makes them feel really miserable. One of the Salaf was asked about this ayah, and الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. What does this mean? Those who are forgetful and neglectful of salah. He says, you know what this means? It means that person, when he prays salah early, it doesn't make this person feel good. And when this person prays salah late, it doesn't bother this person. This is a person who's not abd of Allah. That it should make you feel good that I prayed on time. And it should make you feel bad that you prayed late. This is a sign of abd of Allah. So we take out time, allocate it ahead of time. And finally, the greatest gift Allah gives to a person who continuously shows Allah. Oh Allah, I deserve to be here. I take my kids to hockey, Yusuf and Mu'adh, I take them once in a while. And we see people who take their children for sports. They take them, they spend money on them, they buy all this equipment, all of this for so many years with their own money. How, Ustad, did you go to basketball practice? All the time. Baseball is worse. 5 days of practice and 1 day of games. Every single evening they're being taken to sports, every single day. And 1 day of games. And all their life their parents are paying and paying and paying. And then this same person, after all this struggle, why are they doing all this? Because they want to get accepted by a team. They want to be drafted. And on the night of the draft, you see all these young men crying in tears because now they're accepted by a team. Now, after all these years of spending and working and struggling, now the team that has accepted this person, they're going to pay for his shoes. They're going to pay for the uniform. They're going to pay for coaching. They're going to pay for the gym time. No longer I have to pay for it. Brothers and sisters, all our life, we're bowing our heads in front of Allah, like the Prophet ﷺ, showing Allah how much we love Him and how much we need Him and how much we know that there's nobody that can solve our matters except for Him. There's no one that can cure us except for Him. There's no one that can give us except for Him. There's nobody that can take from us except for Him. And we're doing this all our life until what? Until Allah says, وَاصْطَنَعْتُكَ لِنَفْسِي, I have accepted you. I have accepted you. How He said to Musa alayhi salam, "O Musa, I have accepted you." And now when Allah accepts somebody, all those sins that we struggle with, Allah makes it easy for us to leave. All those bad habits, Allah makes it easy for us to leave. All those good things we wanted to do, Allah makes it easy for us to develop. That is why the Prophet ﷺ, he says, when Allah wants khair for somebody, He uses that person. And when he was asked, what does this usage mean? It means that Allah gives them the tawfiq to do something good before they die. And one of the Salaf wrote under this hadith, he says, "Man arada an yukhtama lahu bit-tawheed falyabda' bil-wahy." A person who wishes to die with the kalima, then before they start any act, see if you have permission to do that. Before you do something, is Allah allowing me to do this? Am I allowed to look at her? Am I allowed to eat this? Am I allowed to be here? Am I allowed to say this? Am I allowed to hear this? A person before any act, if he thinks, أَنِّي مَأْذُونَ فِي هَذَا, am I given permission and allowance to do this? مَنْ أَرَادَ أَنْ يُخْتَمَ لَهُ بِالتَّوْحِيدِ. You want to die with the kalima? Then before you do any act as an abd of Allah, see if you're allowed to be there. If you're not allowed to be there and you hesitate, that means you're deserving to be the abd of Allah. And all that we do, the gift of it at the end of the day, is that we become His. And Allah decides to accept us, and then He grants us these gifts that we are so desirous of, and we're waiting for. That is why one of the poets, he says, "परा हूँ तेरे दर पर दिल शिकस्ता, परा हूँ तेरे दर पर दिल शिकस्ता, शिकस्ता क्यों रहूँ दिल बदल दे, तेरा हो जाऊँ इतनी आरज़ू है, तेरा हो जाऊँ इतनी आरज़ू है, बस इतनी है तमन्ना दिल बदल दे."